Recording in progress. Hello again. This is section 4 of my thesis paper entitled The Eternal Sunshine of the Godless Mind, A Journey to Spiritual Atheism. This was a project I did for my Master's of Spirituality for Merrimack College, and I decided I would try reading the whole paper and giving some thoughts of my own in a more casual way, and hopefully entertaining some questions from anybody who finds themselves down the rabbit hole and listening to this. So here we go. This is on the convergence of spirituality. The mid-20th century was a turbulent time, and whereas it seems like all times are chaotic, this time frame includes some of the most innovative and inspirational spiritual leaders. The fact that they all lived in overlapping periods and could have known each other, and maybe some of them did, and had such a wide range of spiritual thought and aspirations is truly amazing. In this section, we will be discussing the Death of God movement, the New Atheists, the New Age, and modern mystics. So in 1882, when Nietzsche wrote, "God is dead," he released unto the religious world a thought that would provoke theologians and laypersons forever. This phrase was a critique of the modernization of the world, that through science and secularization, they would be forming their own values, no longer needing God, and thus, he was dead. Jack Madden for Philosophy Break relays a common notion that Nietzsche's declaration was not a theological claim, but a cultural diagnosis. The traditional sources of meaning and value grounded in God had lost their authority in modern life. However, the Death of God movement of the 1960s took their inspiration from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer was not an atheist, but near the end of his life he rethought and reevaluated the nature of Christian belief. From his letters and papers from prison, "We are moving towards a completely religionless time," he wrote to a close friend, Eberhard Bethge, in the summer of 1944. "People as they are now simply cannot be religious." Religionless Christianity doesn't equal secular atheism, but the bridge is there. The horrors of World War II caused theological reevaluations that still reverberate in the 21st century. In Night by Elie Wiesel, he reflects on a child hanging from the gallows and says, "Where is God? Here he is. He is hanging here in this gallows." His is a question that many still reflect upon today. So Thomas J.J. Altizer, a proponent of the Death of God movement in the 1960s, writes in Radical Theology and the Death of God, "The loss is not of the idols or of the God of theism, but of the God of the Christian tradition." Altizer notes that theologians have imagined that faith is isolated from history, that faith is independent of a historical ground, and thus is totally autonomous. This moment transformed transcendence into immanence, thereby dissolving the religious ground of subjectivity. This perspective reflects that the Christian faith is frozen in time. They're stuck in their own history. They have not evolved with society, and on the contrary, they have refused to grow or expand past the Gospels. So no longer does faith grow outwards, but only inwards. Authentic contemporary existence is alienated faith, or alienated from all historic forms of faith. We live in modern times, far removed from the historical Jesus, far removed from the original need that God fulfilled. Altizer was not an atheist. It's not that he didn't believe in God, but that God was killed, and Altizer did believe that this happened in the moment of crucifixion. He said that God no longer served the function that people had ascribed to him. Altizer argues that traditional Christianity failed to integrate historical change, resulting in a faith increasingly detached from contemporary existence. His view was not psychological, but ontological and sociological. So Paul Van Buren was also a proponent of the death of God movement. Loyal to a Barthian view, that is Swiss Reformed theologian Karl Barth from 1886 to 1968, Van Buren leans into Christianity as an ethical platform regarding who we are as people. He uses Jesus as an example to follow rather than the organization of the church and God. Hamilton writes about Van Buren. Van Buren does without and does not really need God, preferring pointing to Jesus as a way of standing before the neighbor. Van Buren embraced the concept of a secular Christianity. Now, 20 years later, he would recant this stance, believing that they tried too hard to force this idea onto religion. It's interesting to note the future correlation of Van Buren to both Fugelsang and Palmer, in that they all return to the teachings of Jesus rather than Paul or the institutional church. William Hamilton was the third prominent theologian in this movement, and he writes, "The old approach was not wrong. It was just that the new approach fit our experience better." He views the Reformation as a theological event, one that encourages movement from the cloister or the church to the world, an opening of the gates, releasing the rigid dogma, and embracing a sense of ethics and values accessible to all. He writes, "The breakdown of the religious a priori means that there is no way, ontological, cultural, or psychological, to locate a part of the self or a part of the human experience that needs God." Hamilton says that the part of us that rejects God but affirms the world is just waiting for the correct verbiage to re-engage the beauty of God. As an aside, in my view, the correct verbiage did come along, but it no longer enticed me to re-embrace God. So many contributors clarified that all but Altizer shifted their views to acknowledge the media hype, the intentional provocation with the phrase death of God, and that the idea was a metaphor for the state of society, a wake-up call that we as society were killing God with our progress. This idea is still periodically revisited. Krishnamurti and Theosophy. It is interesting to me that during these same years, Jiddu Krishnamurti was popular in the New Age world. Whereas, where the thinkers in the Death of God movement tried to dismantle the idea of transcendent authority, Jiddu Krishnamurti went a step further. He challenged not only religious belief, but also the hierarchical spiritual structures of the Theosophical society that once elevated him. Krishnamurti questioned the understanding of self and whether any form of psychological authority, external or internal, was ever necessary at all. In Madame Blavatsky's Baboon, Peter Washington discusses and reveals the history of spiritualism, theosophy, and the New Age movement. Theosophy is a spiritual science in two senses. It expounds a body of religious knowledge or dogma acquired by psychic means, and it teaches spiritual techniques designed to promote enlightenment, including study, prayer, and meditation. An intriguing book. It is neither overly naive nor exceedingly cynical, but it covers the players of this realm in fascinating detail. Jiddu Krishnamurti, Krishna, is one of those characters. So in Adyar, India, on a spring evening in 1909, Charles Ledbetter noticed a 14-year-old boy with an extraordinary aura. Ledbetter was a partner of sorts to Annie Besant, leader of the Order of the Star in the East, the Theosophy organization in India and London. He became instantly attached to Krishna's energy and claimed he was to be the next world teacher. Annie Besant convinced Jiddu Narayana that's Krishna's father and Theosophist, into relinquishing conservatorship of both Krishna and his brother to Annie's care. And Krishna was taken around the world, given the best education, and groomed into becoming the world teacher. This act was not fully accepted by the Theosophists. Rudolf Steiner, whose spirituality was Christological, found the thought of Krishnamurti being an incarnation of Christ unacceptable. Narayana brought up a lawsuit trying to retrieve his sons. Krishnamurti, under the watchful eye of Annie Besant, outwardly appeared to live like a monk. And by 1927, Krishna was starting to break from Theosophy, and by 1929, he fully renounced the organization. Krishnamurti announced his belief that truth is a pathless land, and rejected the study of the occult, acceptance of authority, and religious ceremonial as ways to spiritual growth. He would accept no pupils or followers, and he urged them to join no sect or church. Belief must be an individual matter. Organizations cripple it. He then dissolved the Order of the Star in the East, and this act marked the beginning of the end for this particular chapter of Theosophy. The deaths of Besant and Ledbetter made it final. George Arundel, who inherited the presidency from Besant, banned Krishnamurti from Adyar. But Krishnamurti's story does not end there. Washington tells us that Krishna had succeeded in throwing off his theosophical inheritance, emerging as a major spiritual teacher in his own right. His declared pacifism was therefore a matter of public interest. So from 1945 to 1986, Krishna traveled the world as a spiritual leader. Krishnamurti's life was not without drama, and many of the people in this paper have their fair share of human dilemmas. But his story is a fascinating one, and his thoughts are applicable to my thesis and my worldview. In Freedom from the Known, Krishnamurti writes, "The world accepts and follows the traditional approach. The primary cause of disorder in ourselves is the seeking of reality promised by another. We mechanically follow somebody who will assure us a comfortable spiritual life. It is the most extraordinary thing that although most of us are opposed to political tyranny and dictatorship, we inwardly accept the authority, the tyranny of another to twist our minds and our way of life. So if we completely reject, not intellectually, but actually, at all so-called spiritual authority, all ceremonies, rituals, and dogmas, it means that we stand alone and are already in conflict with society. We cease to be respectable human beings. A respectable human being cannot possibly come near to that infinite, immeasurable reality." Coming from a lifestyle beholden to rituals, ceremonies, and spiritualism, that Krishnamurti would have this point of view is logical. And he continues that the question of whether or not there is a God or truth or reality or whatever you would like to call it can never be answered by books, by priests, philosophers, or saviors. He points out that the destructive nature of authority in any field of thinking, saying that leaders and followers destroy each other. It would be accurate to say that Krishna was agnostic, but was he atheist? In the first and last freedom, he states, "Belief is a denial of truth. Belief hinders truth. To believe in God is not to find God. Neither the believer nor the non-believer will find God, because reality is the unknown, and your belief or non-belief in the unknown is merely a self-projection and therefore not real. I know you believe, and I know it has very little meaning in your life. There are many people who believe, millions believe in God and take consolation. First of all, why do you believe? You believe because it gives you satisfaction, consolation, hope, and you say it gives significance to life. Actually, your belief has very little significance because you believe and exploit, you believe and kill, you believe in a universal God and murder each other. The rich man also believes in God. He exploits ruthlessly, accumulates money, and then builds a temple or becomes a philanthropist. And from a lecture in Sanen in 1962, he says, the religious man has no beliefs. Man does not need faith or inherited religion or dogma. It's about the examination of spirit and living with peace. If I did not already think of myself as a spiritual atheist, I could very easily transition over to the stance of Krishnamurti, which was neither atheist or theist, and that man's humanity was merely a compilation and projection of their thoughts and experiences. If one could say that all we are is what we are, then the world of our own creation could be a beautiful thing indeed. Spiritual atheism is not an alternative structure to inhabit. It's not a corrective religion or counter system. It carries no prescriptions and offers no authorities. It simply refuses metaphysical claims while leaving room for inquiry, creativity, and moral cultivation. And in that sense, it shares something with Krishnamurti's insistence that truth cannot be organized or delivered. So if anything, it is less a doctrine and more a refusal to dictate. Encountering Krishnamurti did not validate my thinking so much as reveal that I was not alone in it. His refusal of spiritual authority, his suspicion of belief structures, and his insistence on direct perception resonated with something I had already been circling. The discovery was less confirmation and more recognition, a realization that the interior views I had formed were not without precedent. There is a way of standing in the world that refuses metaphysical certainty and still takes interior reflection seriously, and others have stood here. I'm going to end this section and pick up on modern mystics and then talk about the two sections together.